Alright guys, it's time for the most tedious, annoying, time-consuming, pain in the ass part of your build. The gear set. Grab a snack, order some DoorDash, because I'm fairly sure it will arrive before the end of this video. What's going on, you guys? My name is Cisco, and finally, the next installment of building your build. I know you guys have been asking for it, waiting for it. Your guns have been sitting disassembled on your desk because you didn't decide to look up another video on how to reassemble it. Thank you for the loyalty and being patient. Before we get into actually working on the gear set, subscribe for more content. The YouTube algorithm doesn't like Airsoft, so we need as much help as we can get. So hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, the notification button, so you guys can get notified every time we upload a video. Share this with your friends, your family, anyone that's wanting to upgrade their airsoft gun. And if you want to support the channel directly, go ahead and head over to airsoftgi.com. Pick up all your airsoft goodies. You can get yourself some nice tactical gear, the upgrades that you need to upgrade your gun, a whole new gun. You know, pick up whatever you need. Supporting them supports us, puts food on our table, so we can make this Gucci content for you guys and continue this series, because it's been long ado. Is that the right term? If you have no idea what's going on, I'm gonna let you watch the first episode of Building Your Build. I'm gonna ping it right here or over here, wherever it will pop up. We show you how to upgrade your airsoft gun in the easiest way, most understandable, most digestible way possible. So if there's anything specific that you missed out on throughout the series, make sure you backtrack, check out the whole catalog so you can get to where we are currently. So the big question, why do you want to shim your gears? And it's for efficiency. Now, stock gears out of the factory, you will see typically that they have a little bit of play from side to side. So on camera, you're gonna want to see the gears stay in place while they are rotating. This will guarantee that the gear set isn't shifting from left to right from each other. So what could happen is, if there's too much play, it might slip off a little bit and lock the gearbox up, which is a big no-no. But you also wanna make sure that the gears aren't shimmed too tightly. What this does is cause extra friction in the gearbox, amongst the gears, amongst the motor, which will cause the battery to draw too much power, or the motor to draw too much power from the battery. So you want to make sure it is as smooth as possible while being aligned properly, to make sure that the gears are just running buttery and nice and tasty. And I'm gonna stop with that, and I'm just gonna get onto the tools that you will need to get this done. First off, shims. Now, what are shims? These are basically little washers that you use to, let me grab one of those gears, to space the gear set from side to side in the gearbox. So what this does is, if you're looking at the gearbox here like this, you put the gear set in, and it's just gonna be sitting on the gearbox. And what you want to do is align the gear set properly so it moves it from left to right, the gearbox being like this, left to right, to make sure that they're aligned properly, they're not engaging anything that they're not supposed to, and yeah, just make it as smooth as possible, like I said before. Now, I have my little box here full of miscellaneous tools, but I have a section specifically for shims. Now, typically you want to get a set of shims. G&G has good ones. G&P has good ones, Modify has good ones, Maple has good ones. You don't want to just grab some random shims from like Home Depot, because I'm fairly sure they're not going to be the correct sizing. So get an Airsoft brand shim set. Now, G&G has this pack right here that includes 0.1 millimeter, 0.2 millimeter, and 0.3 millimeter shims. It comes with 6 of each size, which is typically more than enough for one gearbox. But if you are a tech that likes to work on guns and, you know, is constantly shimming, you might want to look into a set that has more, maybe like 10 to 20 per size. Now, you can get some very unique sizes. I know Lonix specifically has 0.15 and 0.25, I think. 0.05, 0.05, 0.15. And you know, that minute difference could be the spacing that makes the efficiency much better in the gearbox. So you're going to want to play around with it. This is very tedious. It's going to take a very long time. Where to start, you're going, actually, let me backtrack. I'm getting ahead of myself. Still at the tools that you will need. So, going to need the shim set. You're going to need the screwdriver in the head that the gearbox screws are. So this is Phillips. You're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. You might need the Allen key set. If there are other parts that you still need to remove, again, backtrack our series to make sure that you have everything that you need. And while we are shimming, we're also going to be aligning the motor. Now, what is important about aligning the motor is just as important as aligning the gear set. You're going to want the motor head. I'll use this one for instance. Oh my goodness, this has so many screws. Slide that on there. You're going to want the motor head to line up with the bevel gear. I have the spare one over here. You're going to want the motor head to align with the bevel gear nice and properly, so it's not too high. That'll cause extra friction and sound very windy. You don't want it to be too low because you have a higher chance of stripping the gear set because corners are a stress point. So you're going to want to shim the motor or space the motor so it's perfectly level with the gear set so you get maximum efficiency. That's what this whole thing is about. Now, the motor that I'm going to be using today is going to be the G&G Talaria 40K. And I grabbed a small type motor, so I'm going to need to go grab a new motor.
So here's a rough drawing of what gears look like inside your gun. You have 4 main gears. You have your pinion gear, bevel gear, spur gear, and sector gear. The pinion gear transmits rotational energy from your motor to the bevel gear, and then it goes to the spur gear, which will translate torque to the sector gear, and the sector gear is what actually pulls back your piston, pulls back your tappet plate, and actuates your cutoff lever if you have one. When you're looking at buying aftermarket gears, you'll see a bunch of numbers. You'll see 13-to-1, 16-to-1, 18-to-1, and so on and so forth. Those numbers represent revolutions of gears. For instance, the first number is going to be the revolutions of your pinion gear or your input ratio. Your output number is always going to be 1 because that means 1 revolution of your sector gear. For example, if your gun has 18-to-1 gears, which most stock guns have, you're going to have 18 revolutions of your pinion gear, and that'll transfer through your gear set into 1 revolution of your sector gear. These numbers are usually rounded, so it's not exact. Higher ratio gears are usually found in higher FPS outdoor guns such as DMRs. The higher ratio means that you can pull back a heavier spring without putting too much stress on your battery, motor, or your gear set. When looking for aftermarket gears, you should remember that 18-to-1s are the standard. If you're looking for more FPS or more efficiency, lean towards the higher ratio gears. If you want a higher rate of fire or better trigger response, go towards the lower ratio gears. This is just a rule of thumb that gives you predictable results. It's not impossible to get high FPS with low ratio gears, and it's not impossible to get high rate of fire with high ratio gears. It's just to give you predictable results. A lot of companies have been increasing their motor quality, but if you are running a budget build, you're going to want to use an aftermarket motor because using a stock motor isn't going to leave you with good results. That being said, there are high torque motors and high speed motors, and you're going to want to pair it properly with whatever gear set you're buying. When you're looking at aftermarket motors, they'll usually be classified as either a high speed or a high torque, or they'll just give you the speed of the motor itself, such as 25K, 30K, 35, so on and so forth. Generally speaking, a 30K is a good balance motor. Anything higher than 30,000 revolutions is considered a high speed motor, and anything lower is considered a high torque motor. That being said, if you chose high ratio gears, you're going to want to go with a high speed motor. And if you chose low ratio gears, you're going to want to go with a high torque motor. And it's important not to mix these up, because if you put a high speed motor into a low ratio gear set, you're going to end up with a lot of heat issues, a lot of electrical issues, probably causing a fire. If you put a high torque motor into a high ratio gear set, you're just going to end up with a really slow rate of fire. Maybe 15 RPS at most. All right, hopefully you learned something, because if not, yeah. Go on the forums or something. I don't know, I'm done here.
What do you mean forums? They're all gone, dude.
The caveman will always be there.
You want to at least take back your drawing or what?
No, you can have it.
All right, so now I have the correct motor that I was going to use. It is the G&G 35K, and if this is a short type motor, I'm going to just, lovely, 35K. And I'm going to be pairing this with a 16-1 gear set from CNC Production. The reason I'm doing this is because I want a good balance of trigger response and rate of fire. And with a 61 gear set, it's higher than other high-speed gear sets in terms of ratios. So it doesn't need that much more torque. So it'll be able to distribute the tension of the spring a little bit easier against the gears. So I'm going to be using that, and I'm going to be upgrading the pistol grip from the standard A2 pistol grip to the Aries Amoeba pistol grip. This is the AM-HG004 in DE. Nice cut. Doesn't have the beaver tail, so it's going to be really compact. Feels very nice. Nice texturing and stuff on there. The reason I am using this one is because it's actually a favorite of Boaz's, and we've been using a lot of PTS. So, yeah. Now, what you're going to want to do from here is install the motor into the pistol grip. This way, you can put it onto the gearbox and see how far up or down you want the motor to be. So, as in our previous video, we're going to unscrew the base plate of the pistol grip. If you are going to use the original pistol grip, your pistol grip should already have the base plate off, so just make sure you install it and then reinsert or reinstall the base plate. So typically you're going to want to put the motor the way that it's going to sit in the pistol grip as you are shooting it. So depending on the trigger assembly or the wiring of the MOSFET that you're going to use will depend if you want the positive side toward the front of the pistol grip or toward the back. So I'm just going to do it as stock for right now, because we're going to be using the stock trigger assembly for the time being. So typically, if I remember correctly, the red wire is going to be routing around over and toward the front of the pistol grip. So once that is done, we're going to reinstall our base plate here, and then if your motor doesn't go through the correct hole of the pistol grip, you would know instantly, because you wouldn't be able to get this far into closing your base plate. I'm telling you guys, this is the most tedious part. I feel sorry for Buzz, because he's just going to sit here and listen to me ramble. Okay, now from here, you're going to see that the motor head is protruding. For example purposes, I'm going to show it to the camera. So the importance of the spring of the motor is this is what allows you to give tension to properly seat the motor in terms of height. So if you can see from here, I'm going to push upward. It's going to put back pressure on the motor so you can adjust the base screw so it's just not loose and wobbling around in there. So I don't need that anymore. I'm going to set that to the side. Now that we have the gear set here, to make life easy, what you're going to want to do is remove the cutoff lever and the selector lever, the tappet plate lever here. So you're going to want to be careful, because both of these have springs. So I'm fairly sure I did not call this part the correct part, so I do apologize. Bear with me. What I find easy to do, because it is a little tight in tension, you just want to use a flathead, take that whole assembly, and as you can see, there is the spring right there. It sits like this, where that little tab is engaging the front wall of the gearbox to give you the tension that you need. So set all this aside. Once this is gone, you're able to push out the other tab here, and that is what makes contact with the selector plate. And then from here, you're going to want to remove the cutoff lever. It's not necessary, but it does make life a little bit easier in terms of shimming. So this has a spring connected to the selector plate as well. So remove the screw. You're going to want to be very careful with this, because on the other side, the spring can somehow lose itself. So you're going to want to flip it over, and then you can see the spring right here. And you're just going to take it out. I'm just going to use this flathead really quick to shove it through. Boom. Luckily, this was magnetized. Otherwise, it would have fallen over, or you could have launched it across the room and lost it forever and be very pissed off at yourself. And then from here, you can remove the selector plate as well. That way you can see the other side of the outside of the gearbox where the gear would be, so you can properly align it. Now, there are many different ways or methods on how to properly shim your gear set. I'm going to show you the technique that works for me. Don't think this is the only way that you can shim your gears, because there are plenty of different ways. I like to shim it off of the bevel gear and the pinion gear, which is the gear on the motor. So from here, I like to properly shim the bevel gear and then shim the spur gear to the bevel gear, and then finally shim the sector gear to the spur gear. There's no other way to do it in terms of succession. Well, not really succession, but you have to shim them each individually. I mean, if you just slap it all together, it's going to be very sloppy. And this is where it gets very meticulous, because there are methods on how to shim from the spur gear, and then so you shim the spur gear properly, and then you shim the bevel gear and the spur gear, and the sector gear, bevel gear, sector gear to the spur gear. This, in my opinion, in terms of the bevel gear, it leaves a little bit of room for error, because you're not shimming the motor directly, so you can have a little bit of lift or space issues, where the bevel gear is either pushing too tightly against the motor or is sitting too far away and not making proper contact with the teeth of the pinion gear, the motor head. So, of course, this is the way the gear set is going to sit. I'm going to start off with the bevel gear, like I said before, and this is how do I phrase this correctly? Okay, you know, I'm just gonna do it. So what I normally do is I will insert the bevel gear the way it's supposed to sit, and then I'm gonna close up the gearbox. So I'm gonna wanna let it sit, make sure all the seams are properly closed, and then you're going to want to tighten your gearbox. So insert the screws around the key areas of where the gearbox needs tension for the gear set. So that's really weird saying it, but basically you're going to want to insert the screws that is going to clamp the gearbox down in the area of the gear set specifically. So I don't really need to shim or close the front of the gearbox off, as long as the tension around the gear set is going to be completely closed. Now, the reason you want to do this is because as you're shimming, without the screws installed, you could be shimming it to, it's hard to phrase, guys. Okay, basically, when the screws are installed, it clamps the gearbox shell to the tightness that it's going to sit at when you are using it. Meaning that when it's unscrewed, there's going to be a little bit more play for the gear set to move around. Which, if you shim it to the gearbox that doesn't have its the screws installed, once you install the screws, it could cause too much friction. It could be shimmed too tightly for your motor, for your gears. So install the gear, install the screws, and then you can see from here the spacing of the gears. So without any shims, this is how the bevel gear, this is how much the bevel gear moves. I'll put it up here for you guys to see. So as you can see, there's a lot of play in here. Now before I even start shimming, what I want to do is check the motor height. Now this is going to be slightly difficult because you don't have too many windows to see. This is where a flashlight will come in handy, which I have handy. You're just gonna want to look in there, see the motor. Now, you guys won't be able to see it, I don't think, from your perspective. Oh, my battery's dying. And my flashlight. But you can see the motor head from here, and it looks to be a little too high. Now, you're gonna need a flathead to, well, at least for this pistol grip, you're gonna need a flathead to unscrew it. You might need an Allen key or an Allen driver to unscrew it. So this looks like there is quite a good amount of play in here. So I'm just going to see how far up. Don't die on me, come on. Now, from my eyes, it does look to be a little too high. Now, another way that you could do this, which I should have done before closing the gearbox, is installing the pistol grip on half the gearbox shell with the gear in place. So I will now lead into that. Boaz just clip forward to me unscrew. So the part where the gearbox is open. All right, now that we have the gearbox shell open and the bevel gear in place, what you're gonna wanna do is line up the pistol grip with the gearbox. As you can see, there is a little ridge here that will slide into the channel here for you to properly align. Now, this is just gonna be a rough estimate, guys. I have seen people do this where they screw in the pistol grip and then install the motor. If you want to be that detailed, by all means, go for it. Now, this might be able to be seen easier on camera. Come on, work with me. All right, now you can see the gear head right here. Oh no, that's a bad angle. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it. So again, guys, this is just gonna be for motor height. So you're just gonna wanna make sure that the gearbox is placed firmly down onto the pistol grip. Now, from here, you can see the motor head and the bevel gear. You can see that the motor head is slightly too low. So I'm gonna want to move the motor upward so it is engaging properly. Oh. More. Almost there. Perfect. So, if you guys can see here, the motor head is aligned properly. So I have it sitting so all of the teeth of the motor are making complete contact with the gear, so it's not sitting at the very edge of the gear set. So it'll have a little bit more strength. when it comes time to actually fire the gun. So from here, now I will close everything up again and test the movement from left to right on the shim, or for shim. I wonder how this is going to come out in post. Like, there's just going to be a lot of dead space of me trying to concentrate on shimming and just getting it done. I hope you guys are enjoying this, by the way. Again, subscribe for more content. Give us a thumbs up. Ring the bell to get notified. Support us by supporting yourself. Cheers. Said it before. If you haven't done it, why not? Do it. I checked the algorithm. It says like 90% of our viewers aren't subscribed. Blasphemous. You guys are ridiculous. Okay, now that we are here, I'm going to reinsert the pistol grip onto the gearbox so I can see how much space from the bottom of the gearbox the gear has to move to contact the motor. Now, the easiest way to do this is to press on the gear set, or the gear itself, the bevel gear, and as you can see, it's still moving. So there is a little bit of play in there. So the goal is to get the bevel gear to sit directly on the motor, but not be pushing it too far over. As you can see, if there are too many shims, when it is closed and put together, it can still force the motor over, which is a bad thing. So what you're gonna wanna do is just make sure it sits properly like that. And then you're gonna wanna toy with your shims from here. Each gear set is going to be different, especially from different manufacturers. There are, like, they try to do the best in terms of quality control and tolerances and stuff, but there are many different factors on the dimensions of the gun. First off, the gearbox itself, and then you have your bearings or bushings for your gun, and then you have the gear set itself and the company that it is from. All of these factors will determine, you know, different spacing and stuff. And there isn't any set science to it, from what I have found. If there is, please let me know in the comments, because I haven't figured it out yet. So from here, you're going to want to shim the top of the gear set, which is technically the bottom. So I noticed there was a fair amount of space in there. So I'm going to just toy around with it a little bit. Now, the amount of shims that I'm going to use isn't going to be the same amount of shims that you need to use. Even if you do the exact same setup, the same products, it might not turn out the same way. You might have, again, a little bit of variation. So you're going to need to pay close attention to this and see how it works for you. And the tedious part about this is reinserting every single screw, tightening the gearbox back up, reinstalling the pistol grip, and then seeing how much space you need from there. Now, guys, again, there are many different ways on how to shim a gearbox. This is the method that I have found to work the best for me. Typically, when I do this method, it turns out pretty good. But I know there are plenty of techs out there, especially on YouTube, that have videos on how to do this. One guy that comes to mind is the Airsoft tech. Shout out to you. I don't think we've ever engaged on social media. I don't think we've ever met in person either. But he has a fantastic video explaining how to do everything, and he is a little bit more patient on how to do it. All right, so from here, I'm going to reinstall the pistol grip and motor, and then what I'm going to look for now is to see if the motor gets pushed downward closer to the wall of the gearbox. So if it does, that means I added too many. And it looks like it didn't move at all. So now my goal is to check if there's still more space. And from what it feels, it doesn't seem like there's any space at all. Now, you can see when I push it, it is moving, but again, that is pushing against the motor head, the pinion gear. So I'm not actually, there isn't actually any space for the gear to move in between the wall of the gearbox and the pinion gear. So that looks to be good. So now that that has been spaced, my next goal is to work on the spacing for the top of the gear. So now that I have removed the pistol grip and the motor, you can see there's still a good amount of play. So that is because it's coming from the opposite side of the gear set. And you're gonna wanna make sure that that is completely spaced as well, so there is less chance of the gear somehow moving in any way. And as you saw before, me applying a little bit of pressure to the bottom of the bevel gear was able to move the motor. And the goal is to keep everything stationary so you don't get that movement. Now, I'm going to do the opposite side. And I think I forgot my canned air. Canned air is actually a tool that'll come in handy. I think I might need to cut to grab that. But first, let me work on this. It's not really necessary. It is a trick that that I learned from one of our techs that just allows you to spin the gear set inside the gearbox fairly fast compared to using a screwdriver to wind it. All right. Now, when you disassemble the gearbox again, you want to be careful. You want to make sure that your shims aren't sticking to the bearing or bevel, bearing or bushing, because if there is extra grease or excess grease here, it can stick. You just want to make sure that you put it to where it was originally. You don't misplace it, because then you'll have to reshim the whole side all over again. So I'm going to take that out. And from the spacing that I saw, I think I'm going to need a little bit more. Now it does come a little bit more naturally the longer you, or the more times you shim, you will get a better understanding of it. And it may seem a little bit confusing, but I would recommend listening to this a few times to try and understand it a little bit better, to make sure that your gear is properly shimmed. And boy, you think this is rough? Wait till you do the other two gears. You gotta do this all over again. And if you don't shim it right, if I don't get this right, if it's too tight or too loose, I need to take it apart, add more, or remove some. You know, having a wide variety of different size shims does help dramatically, because again, like I said before, the that 0.05 millimeter of space makes a world of difference. You can have a little bit of play, or you can get it perfectly shimmed where it's not moving at all, but it's so smooth when you run it. All right. Let's see here. Now, as you can see, it is completely closed, and there is almost no play. Now, I don't think I'll be able to get it any tighter than this, but this is damn near perfect in my opinion. I would leave it like this in my personal gun. So, just so you guys can see, because I'm shaking my hand, there is no large movement. So the movement that we had before compared to now almost non-existent. Now the next thing you want to do is spin the gear set. Now, obviously we have the window here, so I'm going to use the window. But I might run downstairs and grab the canned air so I can show you how you can test it a little bit more efficiently. So that is spinning. I do feel a little bit of friction. So you're going to want to test it on both sides because gravity does take a little bit of a effect here. But yeah, so the goal is to get it to spin as smoothly as possible. As you can hear, there was a little bit of rattle there, and I do believe that is because of the bearings. Actually, these are bushings. No, wait, ball bearings. Ball bearings are bearings. Bushings. These are bushings because there are no ball bearings that you can see unless it's encased. Then I have no freaking idea. All right, but it is winding pretty smoothly. So, all right, I'm gonna go grab the canned air really quick, and then I'm gonna show you the little trick that I know. All right, now that we have the canned air, this is the trick that I like to do. So you're going to need the straw because this will be able to focus the air, funnel the air into a specific spot, and do this away from your work area so the air doesn't blast everything and you lose some parts. So what you're gonna wanna do is just place the straw right at the gears and then point it at the teeth and then just use it to push it. Now, you can hear that buzzing. That means that the bearing is slowing down the gear set because the gear set is spinning faster than the bearing can handle. You can do this by upgrading your gear set or your bearings. However, the amount that this is going to be spinning is going to be much faster than what the motor is going to be doing to the gear itself. So just pulse it a little bit. The goal is to make sure that it can spin freely, just like that. Now, if the air is not able to spin the gear, that means there is a lockup somewhere. Either it's too much friction on the gear from the shims, it's squeezing it too tightly, not allowing it to spin properly. That's going to cause too much power draw from the battery later on. So you're going to want to make sure that the gear set is able to spin freely, just like that. So again, this is spinning much faster than what it needs to be, but I will say that is pretty damn good. So now we are going to get into shimming the Spur gear. All right, now it's time to shim the Spur gear to the bevel gear. Now again, you're going to want to be careful with your shims when removing it. What does help to keep them in place is once you have them installed and set, you can hold it together like this and use some gear grease just to hold it in place. We'll talk about greasing up the gears properly later, but this is just going to be to hold those shims in place. So I like to hit it from the side so it gets underneath each shim and then holds it in place. That way it does not fall off. And then let's get the back side here. So we'll just tuck that in a little bit. And that should, all right, prevent it from falling out. Okay, now for the bevel gear and the Spur gear, what you're going to want to do is align the top teeth of the bevel gear to the lower teeth of the Spur gear. And the way I like to do this is having it so it's just above hitting the platform here. This is where the anti-reversal latch will lock onto. You're going to want to have it sitting slightly above that so it's not rubbing against it, causing friction. And then, of course, have it spaced enough so it's not having any friction against the walls of the gearbox as well. So we're going to get into that right now. So I have shimmed the Spur gear to the bevel gear properly. If you can see right here, let me get the flashlight. So There is a little bit of space. It's gonna look pretty off on the camera. There is a little bit of space between the walls or section where the anti-reversal latch catches, but it is properly spaced, making proper engagement with the bevel gear. Now I need to shim the spur gear to the gearbox to make sure it is locked in place and there's still no movement. And like how I shimmed the bevel gear, I'm going to actually remove the bevel gear. That way it's not interfering with any spacing. So I'm going to close up the gearbox, just like this. Add shims, so when I am done, it's not moving from side to side in the gearbox shell. So let me get that done really quick. On here, there is absolutely no movement from side to side, but that's because I actually put too many shims on the top side of the spur gear. Now I'm gonna try and show you guys on camera. In here, let me actually hold it just like that. Oh no! Benefits of having a quick change spring guide. Okay, so if you can see the gear in here, I'm going to try and spin it. There is a lot of friction. Like it is, I have to put a good amount of force on the gear set there to move it. And even when I try the canned air, it does not move at all. So I'm going to need to remove a shim or completely change the way that I shimmed it so it's not squeezing on the gear set and it runs smoothly. I hate taking apart the gearboxes. Time to get into it. So I remember that I put a 0.1 millimeter on the top and a 0.2 millimeter at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is remove the 0.1 millimeter, and I'm going to see if just the 0.2 millimeter is enough space or if I am going to have any problems from here. So time to reassemble. And I'll try to do it really quick to test. No cuts, let's do it. You know, now that I put the clock on myself, it makes this a little bit more nerve-wracking. It's okay, we're gonna roll with it. We were debating, honestly, on how we wanted to do this, because we want to show you how to do it, but again, the gear set is situational. The amount of gears that I'm going to use, or the amount of shims that I'm going to use per gear on each side of the gear is going to be completely different from what you need. So, but now that we are here, I have it all locked together. I'm going to test the spacing again, and there is no space there, and there is less friction, but it's still going to be really tight. The goal is to be able to spin it without force. So kind of like a top, right? You spin it, right? And then it just continues to spin on its own momentum. That's what you want the gear set to do by itself. And still currently too much friction. So I'm going to remove another 0.1 millimeters. I'm going to change the 0.2 millimeter to the 0.1 millimeter and see how that plays out. And then luckily for me, I have a few 0.15 millimeter shims here. So if 0.1 millimeter is too small and is still giving too much space, I have that in between to make up the gap of space and then get it as properly shimmed as possible. That's the 0.2. Set that aside. The 0.1. Like I said, guys, tedious. This sucks. But I promise you, the payoff, worth it. The fact that you did it by yourself, you got it running perfectly by yourself. Now, don't be too hard on yourself if it might not sound right or if it's too tight or too loose. You know, it's trial and error. The amount of knowledge that I got, I was very lucky enough to learn from a lot of the great techs of Airsoft GI. And and I have tips from the internet. So the internet, excuse me, was probably more helpful because the techs don't want to deal with me. All right, now it looks like there is no. There is just a little bit, like not even 0.5 millimeter of space. Now to test it, did you hear that? Oh, that is perfect. All right, there's a train going by. We're rolling through it. All right, to test it with the canned air. Oh, perfect. You hear it? Oh, it's perfect. All right. Now that we have the spur gear shimmed perfectly, it's time for the last gear, the sector gear. Some might say it's the most important gear. I say all the gears are important because if any one of them are messed up, the entire gun's messed up. It's not right. It's not right. All right. Now, to get to the sector gear. Okay. Now, again, you're going to want to use a little bit of gear grease. Just apply it onto the top. That'll hold it in place. Now, the streaks that you're seeing here are the grease from the factory. So I'm going to wipe all that down at the end of this to make sure that it's not on there, so we can use gear grease to properly lubricate the gears. So boom, make sure that all stays on. It's not going anywhere. Perfect. Okay, now for the last gear, it's the same method. Shim it so there's no side movement, but it's engaging properly. Now, with the spur gear, see that? See the shims right there? You always want to be careful. Always be careful. Keep a close eye on them. Make sure they don't move. All right. Now, the sector gear is going to engage the top gear set or top teeth of the spur gear. So again, you're going to want to space it so it's not touching this top portion of the bottom teeth, but it's still properly engaging, so there's not as much, or there's the least amount of friction as possible. The teeth are still fully engaged without causing any friction in them jeans. What song is that? I think that's a Trey song. Okay. But anyways, so you're going to want to make sure you do that. So going to want to shim the bottom to shim the bottom of the sector gear, moving it upward so you can get the correct height from there. Now, what I like to do is I like to eyeball the bottom, because typically you will see the sector gear pressing down on the spur gear, just because there are no shims there at all. You can actually see, maybe you can't see it on camera, you can see the gear is kind of tilted, the spur gear is tilted this way because of the sector gear being pushed down onto it. So from here, all I gotta do, this is a 0.2 millimeter, I remember. It's good to keep track of what shims you're using, because later on, like if you get them all mixed up or anything, might cause an issue. All right, so there's still a little bit of contact. Let's try this. So in my opinion, that's a little too high. Gonna go down one shim. or 0.1 millimeter is what I'm going to go down. All right, so now, flashlight. Where is my flashlight? Here it is, in front of me. So now you can see the space in between the sector and the spur gear, that it is not making contact with this surface here, but it is still properly engaged. Now, of course, there's going to be a little bit of movement from my finger, but when it is in place, it should be all right. Now, the benefit of this is because the sector gear does not infringe on the movement of the right side of the gear set or the sector gear, I can easily just place it together and see how much space there actually is. So again, what you're going to want to do is tighten it down. Don't get into the bad habit of what I just did, of only clamping it down without installing the screws, because again, that will cause issues later on in terms of friction, because too much space. You want as tight as possible. This is tight. Good here, here. Okay, let me see. So I am already feeling a lot of resistance from the gear set, but there is still a lot of movement. As you can see here, I push down on it and it moves. So I need to figure out where that friction is coming from. I don't believe it's coming in between, or the space in between the spur gear. It might be coming from the bearing itself. So let me figure it out. Quick tip, push down on the gear set when you are opening it. That way, see, it's getting stuck. Push down on it. So I do think that the problem is coming from the bearing. So I'm going to need to cut to figure it out. The of the bearing or bushing, and then you're going to want to line it up and then just tap it down with your lighter mallet. Don't use like a heavy ball bearing freaking like hammer, because you're just gonna blow it. And be very careful if you use it, or if you're using ball bearings, especially if it's not the proper size. You could punch all of it out and just ruin it, and it's a pain in the butt, I promise. So you want to make sure that it is secured in place. I have already done so off camera for the sake of time, but like I said, guys, get a punch, put a little bit of super glue on the end, get a punch, hold it down, knock it in place, and then you're good to go. Latch is actually coming out with a tool that helps you properly align the bearings together, and it does have a spring, so I think it might be able to push the bearings in place as well. There are specialty tools as well that you can get to secure all of the bearings all at once. So keep that in mind. But now that that has been corrected, I have properly shimmed the right side of the sector gear. So now we're just going to put it together and test it right here. Again, like I said, you're going to be opening and closing this gearbox more times than you thought you would, but you get used to it fairly quickly. Be careful. Be careful to use the correct the correct size Phillips head to the screw. Don't use anything smaller. When I first started my teching adventures, I did just that, use a smaller Phillips head, and I stripped out like 3/4 of the screws, a good portion of the screws, and made it difficult. Then I had to tap them and figure it all out, get new screws. Pain in the butt, save yourself the hassle. All right, now, if you guys can see that on camera, oh, buttery. It doesn't sound buttery, but trust me, it is smooth. When you're holding the gearbox, you can feel the vibration of the gear moving. It doesn't feel like it's scraping against anything. It's moving fairly free. I'm going to use the fan air. The air is able to push it. Nice. So now that that is done, we are going to reassemble the gearbox completely and test our alignment. And from here, we are going to be able to see what we need to do in terms of the rest of the shimming. So let me take this gearbox apart again, and then I'll show you how to rebuild the gearbox. All right, guys, before we reassemble the gearbox, I'm going to show you how to lubricate the gears. Now, again, use gear grease. We recommended before. I'm using Super Lube, the synthetic blend. I forget the exact one. But there are plenty that you can use. See how I didn't lubricate this? See that? See how it's coming off like that? So, now, even that side too. You're messing me up, guys. Okay, just make sure you're very careful with your shims. So what I like to do is I like to hold them in place with the shims, and then using a brush, like a paint brush or something, just a light coating on the gears. Now, I have seen a lot of companies improve on this, because before they used to just slather it up. Like, I mean, when you took apart this gearbox, it was 40% grease, and it was disgusting, and having a lot of grease can actually affect its performance as well. It can cause friction just because there's a lot of sludge there. So that's part number one. Part number two is that if you are running a MOSFET, especially an optical MOSFET, you don't want to have too much gear grease inside the gearbox, because what will happen is, as the gears are spinning, it's going to launch grease in every direction of the gearbox. Because it spins, it's going to shoot outward, and you can get onto the sensors of your MOSFET. Oh my goodness, I kicked it on accident. I'm so sorry, Boaz. Sorry about that. So, as I was saying, the gear grease is going to spray everywhere, and it could get on one of the sensors, especially if it's an optical sensor, and cause problems, because the gear grease will affect the laser path and cause the light to refract and just cause a whole bunch of issues. So right here, I'm just using the brush and spinning the gear just to lightly coat it. It should be good to go there. And then for the bevel gear, down a little bit, just brush down on it. You don't want it too much. You don't want too much. All right. So that looks good. That looks good. All right, set that down. Now, to reassemble the gearbox itself. First, I'm going to want to put in my cutoff lever. Actually, because I removed the selector plate, this is the first thing you want to do, because reinstalling this later is going to be so much of a pain in the butt. So just go ahead and slide that back into place. Make sure it's moving properly. You're good to go there. Reinstall your cutoff lever. Just put that down. Have the screw here. Ooh. Place. Actually, was that the correct screw? No, that was not the correct screw. This is why it's important, guys, to place everything where you know it's going to be, especially like this. Come on. Okay. I actually put the screw for the, I forget what this is called. Boss, please insert. It is for the selector plate. So you can tell the difference because this one has much wider threading compared to this one. That's because it is gripping onto the inside of the plastic on that post. All right, so let's get this reinstalled. Once that's in place, make sure it's nice and loosey-goosey. Then from here, flip it over, and you're going to want to reinstall the spring. Goal is to get it onto the post there and then slide it onto the cutoff lever. A flathead does wonders for this. Make sure your finger is there just in case it slides off and then shoots across the room like it almost did right there. So once you get it onto the little notch sticking out, you're good to go. Make sure it moves. Make sure the cutoff lever moves here. Perfect. From here, you're going to reinstall your selector bar, arm. Okay. Way to do it. This open side always stays toward the bottom. See how it's a little bit flatter up here and then more space down here? You're gonna want it just like that. Or vice versa. I could be gravely mistaken. Then just line it up. And the post is going to be right there. Boom. And then again with your screw, lock that down. Okay. Patience is a virtue. All right, almost. My hands are shaking, guys. Why? Why are my hands shaking? Why is this so difficult for me? Okay, get that screw in. Just like that. Boom. Make sure that is moving. Make sure the other side right here properly engaging. Perfect. Okay, now from here, you're going to reinstall your trigger assembly. Now we're going to be using the stock one to test the gun out. We are going to have a separate section or separate video for a MOSFET install. So stay tuned for that. So what we're gonna wanna do is make sure the trolley here is correct. There's a trigger trolley post. So there's the two pieces here that make the connection. Make sure that is already installed before tightening down, securing the post there, or the trigger assembly to the gearbox. So then just get your screw, put that back in place. All right, bam. All right, so to reinstall your trigger spring, I like to put it onto the trolley first and then slide it over the post there. And then once that's in, it's going to stay in place because of the spacing in the gearbox. It will be all right. Now, for the wiring, I like to have the long red wire sit all the way at the very bottom when first installing it. Luckily, this gearbox has the shelf here that you can tuck the wiring into so the motor won't accidentally like touch it, engage it. So as it's spinning, there's less of a chance for the motor to accidentally cut the wire open or cut it completely. causing a short or causing a failure in the gun. So from here is where we're going to start to assemble the gear set and the compression set. So first, I like to do the Spur gear. See that? You see how the shim stayed on the gear set? I didn't even notice that, guys. Luckily, we caught it. Please be very attentive and make sure that you are keeping track of everything. All right, so once that is in, I'm going to put in the sector gear here. Once the sector gear is in, this is where I like to do the compression set, because the compression set isn't going to give me as much problems as the anti-reversal latch is going to. Now, from here, we have the complete compression set from our last video. Still perfect. So we're just going to slide that into place as one piece. Let's not have the gears engage it currently. Make sure that that is moving properly, that is seated properly. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. The tappet plate spring. A lot of people forget about the tappet plate spring. It's required because this is what pushes the air nozzle back and forth. Without this, the gun won't feed. The gun won't fire. You look dumb. Make sure you include it. All right. Easiest way, in my opinion, to do it, install it onto the tappet plate first, and then get a smaller Allen driver or Allen key, use it to pull it over, and then just latch it on there. Once it's there, you're good to go. Now, actually what I forgot to do was install the trigger, so I'll do that right now. For the sake of you guys, let's install the trigger before we install the sector gear. So back it up, sector gear, make sure the spring is properly aligned. There's a hole for the spring to sit into, and then you're going to want to tuck the spring into this metal shelf here. So just have that sitting right there, slide it forward, and then you're going to need to finesse it a little bit to make it work. So once it's in there, this can be a little, what's the correct word, of a pain in the ass. If the spring is very tight and the tolerances aren't the best, it can just slide off. So be careful, be wary of this. You're gonna wanna hold this down. Actually, AirTech Studios, they have a clamp system for both the anti-reversal latch and the trigger, so it holds it down while you are reinstalling the gearbox or reassembling the gearbox, so you don't run into any issues on that end. See, like right here, the AirTech Studios clamp would help me hold this down to keep the anti-reversal latch and the wiring in place, because reinstalling it is going to be a pain in the butt. All right, so from here, I'm going to reinstall the compression set. Make sure the spring doesn't get bound up or turned the wrong way there. So look at that. See how it's engaging right here on the trigger spring? Gotta finesse it. All about finesse. Bruno Mars said it. All right. Okay. Once that's properly aligned again, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that down. Not tighten it down, but put it on the post again. That can happen. See that? There we go. Boom. Right there. Perfect. Okay. Now, a trick that I have learned, you could actually push the tappet plate back and then have the tappet plate sit on top of the shims to hold it in place. This helps sometimes, not all the time. In this situation, I don't think it will help because it's not, the tappet plate isn't lifting too much, so I'm not too worried about it. So now the last part is installing the anti-reversal latch and the bevel gear. This is one of the biggest pains in the butt at first, but once you get a hold of it, once you get it down, it becomes fairly easy. So what you want to do is have your bevel gear ready to install. So you're going to have your spring already installed onto the anti-reversal latch. There is the bend here that goes just like this. So you're going to insert the spring on the bottom post and have that lined up. Hold it there like this. Put it into the anti-reversal latch hole. Hold that down. So then now you don't have to worry about the spring. That's going to stay in place until you start pushing around with it. So what I'm going to do, because this wiring is causing me a lot of drama, I'm going to use a screwdriver to hold it down. So I'm just going to use my hand here to hold the wiring down while I get the gearbox, or while I get the anti-reversal latch installed. So I'm going to pull the arm here, and I'm going to use my middle finger to hold it down, and then I'm going to install the bevel gear. So a little bit of finesse, like I said. Once you get that, I'm going to release it, and then I'm going to hold it down, and then from here you can see it's moving, right? But the easiest way to get it is to hold that down in place so the anti-reversal latch is actually touching the slot in the bevel gear. So this will cause, oh my goodness, the wire. So this will help hold it in place. Now, if you don't have that clamp, I'm going to use my screwdriver here. Luckily, there is a cut on the back of the gearbox here, so I can hold it down. And then from here, it's time to reinstall. Now, luckily, because I have the quick change spring system, I don't have to worry about putting in a spring guide. So just for the sake of the video, when reinstalling a non-quick change spring guide, you want to hold it here, have a screwdriver inserted into the back, and then as you are closing the gearbox shell, you're going to want to push in the spring guide and hold the notches in place. Now, sometimes gearboxes are nice and don't have the notches and it's completely round. All you need to do is just slide it in there and then let it close naturally. But if you have the notches in there, unfortunately, you have to do a little bit more finesse and line them up with the corresponding grooves in the gearbox. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, hold that down. We're good here. Wiring's good there. Now the only thing I need to worry about is this. So I'm just going to push that up a little bit. I'm going to use the gearbox. There's the lever or the platform here. And I'm going to use to actually push upward on it. Now, if you can't do it, use your thumb or screwdriver to help line everything up. And then from here is where the major finesse comes in. So, re-closing the gearbox with everything in it is the biggest pain in the butt. So, a screwdriver does come in handy. Use a screwdriver to press that in, and then make sure all the gears are properly aligned. As you can see, the bevel gear here is not aligned, so I'm going to use a Allen key just to push from the side. Boom, perfect. And once you kind of get everything lined up properly, the gearbox just kind of closes itself. Like, because of the amount of pressure that you're putting on it, you could see the seam line of the gearbox, and everything looks good. You'll notice immediately if anything is bulging. What I like to do is check the tappet plate spring by pushing on the air nozzle, make sure that's engaging. As you can see, the piston slid forward. It's properly in the rails right there. So now what I'm going to do is close it up completely. So from here, lock this down, and then I am going to test the gearbox outside of the gun with the motor. Now this may or may not be frowned upon depending on who you talk to. The reason for this is because the gearbox isn't braced against the receiver of the gun, holding it together. If you're building a high stress build, all of the force of the piston ends here. Versus if it were braced inside of a receiver against the hop-up unit, it transfers the energy. You know, science for that. I think that's, I don't know if that's Newton's law. No, that's the first law. That's an object in motion stays in motion. But obviously this motion comes to an end. But the energy is transferring forward. That is really technical. Jeez. A rabbit hole I don't want to go down. All right. So once I get all this tightened down, I'm going to test it. Now, if you really don't feel comfortable testing it outside of the gearbox, by all means follow our instructions on how to reinstall it and test it inside the gearbox completely assembled. That's perfectly fine. It just adds a few more steps to your your tech work. So from here, I'm going to reinstall the quick change spring guide. I can just use my thumb, line it up properly, and now to test it with the motor. Let me uninstall this. Yeah. Okay. Now to install the pistol grip. Most pistol grips don't come with new mounting screws, so use the ones that you had from your original assembly. Insert the wiring accordingly. Make sure it's not catching on anything. Slide that over, let it down. Looks good. It's not folded in any way. So, long screwdriver time. Like in the video I showed you, just make sure that you are properly aligned. You're good to go. Now, what is really cool is a lot of companies have started including 4 mounting screws to secure the pistol grip, which I really appreciate. For testing, I'm only going to install 2 of the screws, but it's good to know that, you know, they're making it more secure, more braced against the gun, so there's less room for failure. But 2 will be perfect enough for us to work with. Now, routing the wires in the original configuration, the red wire comes, so this is the air nozzle front of the gearbox. The red wire comes up top and around the hole that the motor goes in. So comes up top, around the hole, and then you're gonna want it sitting on top. And then the black wire you're gonna want to tuck toward the bottom right corner. And then for the motor, you're gonna have the positive side toward the front of the gearbox. So from here, so just slide right in. Let me make sure I'm not pinching any wires or anything. Should be good to go. Here. That wiring. More finesse, more finesse. Bruno Mars, give me power. All right. Okay. Now see what I did here. I installed it, but the wiring got stuck on the top side. So I need to take it out and I need to put it toward the bottom. That way you can route it properly. Now that it is toward the bottom, I can install the negative side first. And typically the way you want to route the wiring is you want to install the one closest, or the one that has a short amount of wire first, and then the one that has the excess amount of wire can go over that plug. So plug that in. So see how it goes over the negative. This could be reversed depending on the MOSFET or gearbox that you're using. I know Classic Army, I believe it is reversed, so the black wire goes all the way around. So keep that in mind. From here, I'm going to reinstall the base plate. Now, when you're doing this, see how I was working it a little bit. You're going to want to make sure these corners aren't pinching or pressing down on the wiring itself. So see that? Just gonna slide it in between, push that down. There were no issues there. I didn't feel anything causing any resistance there. So now just gonna tighten this down. Nice and secure. And the first shot is always the scariest because it's a gamble. It's always a gamble. I might have had the motor too high. I might have had it too low. We're gonna make adjustments as needed. But also, I might have shimmed it too tightly. I might not have shimmed it enough. I'm going to be using an 11-1 LiPo battery with a 15C discharge. Pretty standard battery. 11-1 is a little high, but use whatever battery that you know will cycle the gun. So a 9.6 will work just fine, but yeah, be careful. So right now it should be in full auto. Push it all the way forward in safety, and then the halfway. See how scary that was? So that does sound a little bit windy. Going to back it off a little bit. You can just find the spot. Now you see how the piston's getting stuck back here? That's because of how strong the motor is to the battery. So it is actually overcycling. Now, I would say it sounds pretty good. I'm gonna go into it a little bit more to make sure everything's working properly. Because of how strong the motor is though, and it's causing overcycling of the piston and the gear set, I am going to add a MOSFET to this build. But I'm doing that in the next episode. All right, guys, so now the goal is to make sure the gears are running as smooth as possible. There are multiple things that can affect the sound of the gun. It could be the angle of the pistol grip. If it is causing the motor to sit too forward or sit too back, you want to do everything that you can to make sure everything is properly aligned. And once you get it to where it doesn't feel grindy, or it isn't as sluggish, or sluggish I guess is the right word. It doesn't sound as sluggish, and you're good to go. From here you can reassemble it into the gun and you're good to go. But we're gonna leave it the way it is right now. I'm gonna look at it in a little bit just to make sure everything is in tip-top shape. I think we are in pretty good condition where we are standing. But stay tuned for the next episode where we show you how to install a MOSFET. That's gonna be very exciting. So for those of you who have made it this far, congratulate yourself. You guys have finished the upgrade basic package. We are now going to get into just a little bit more technicalities. Subscribe for more content. That next episode should be coming very soon. Fingers crossed. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video. Share it with your friends and family. Support the channel by supporting Airsoft GI. Get all your Airsoft goodies there. Supports us. Helps allow us to make good content for you. I know this one was pretty long. Boaz is gonna hate me, but it's information that you guys needed and we wanted to provide. So thank you for staying tuned, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.